Hold Okay, so we are on live. So as people come on, we will welcome them in.
Absolutely.
And I just want to welcome everyone to Dr. Tara Tuesdays. I am very excited to have Dr. Anthony Outler, otherwise known as the Unschooler, join me for such an important topic tonight. This is one where even if you're not able to catch the live and you're catching a recap, I hope that you will take some of the jewels and some of the knowledge dropped and apply it to the children and people in your life as we talk about an issue that impacts everyone and I think doesn't get as much attention as it deserves as far as being proactive. A lot of times as society, we talk about, our topic for tonight is talking to your children about race. And a lot of times it comes about after something has happened. So I think as a society, we're more reactive to this versus being proactive. And so one, Dr. Outler, I just want to thank you for taking the time to join me. You're joining me all the way from Atlanta.
Yes, indeed.
So for everyone just tuning in, this is Dr. Carr. I have a guest with us, Dr. Anthony Outler. He is an educator, a scholar, an expert on equity, an expert on issues related to race and talking with children. And so I just want to start by just asking the question, as an educator, as you're also a father, as a father and as a scholar, why do you think this conversation is so important? Having open and honest conversations with our children about race is so important, especially in today's times.
It's especially important when we begin to think about the pervasiveness of race and racism in our society. I'd like to answer this question drawing an illustration by Dr. Beverly Tatum. Mm-hmm. There's a book called Too Much Schooling, Too Little Education. No, I'm sorry, not Too Much Schooling, Too Little Education. It's Why Are So Many Black Children Sitting Together in the Cafeteria.
Mm-hmm.
And she painted a beautiful illustration in terms of how racism operates in our society. And she likened racism to the moving sidewalk in the airport. Mm-hmm. And so she said, most people, we get on this sidewalk and we just ride, right? We have our luggage and that sidewalk kind of carries us along. And so in essence, that would be comparable to just in terms of how racism and racial ideology operates in our society. It's like we're all kind of standing on this moving sidewalk, kind of going, we're all, these ideas influence all of us, right? And a lot of times we just go on unconsciously carrying these ideas and acting, as a result of these racialized ideas. She said very few people are what we call actively racist. So these will be the people that's on the sidewalk that's actually moving forward, right? So when we talk about racism, a lot of people get defensive and they talk about, well, I'm not in the Ku Klux Klan. I don't tell my children to hate, anybody. I teach my children to love everybody, this kind of thing. And so very few people are actively racist walking on this sidewalk. And what she calls for us to be is actively anti-racist, right? So these would be the people that turn around on that moving sidewalk and move twice as fast in the opposite direction. And so most people are, like I said, are just kind of standing and moving alongside this sidewalk. And living in a society like ours, where racial narratives are pervasive, right? We're bombarded with them in the media, through the ways we're educated. These meanings about what blackness is and what whiteness is and what it means to be black, what it means to be white. And our children are socialized in the same way. And so if we're not proactive about teaching them about race, teaching them about, helping them to understand, the ideas associated and the meanings associated with whiteness, with blackness, and what it means to be Latino. If these things aren't taught to our children, they're going to just absorb them from a society that propagates notions of race all the time. And so we're either going to allow our children to move along this sidewalk and accept the kind of the pervasive notions about what whiteness is and what blackness is, or we're going to we're either going to be proactive or we're just going to allow them to be victims actually of racial or racist ideology.
Interesting that you said that, because I know that as a professional, I'm doing trainings, and as you are too, doing trainings around equity. And one of the things that I often talk about with, I'm big on parents being aware of, microaggressions and the achievement gap in schools. And I've seen in my own life, taking away the Dr. Tara piece in my own life, how my children have been impacted by that narrative, right? By them being given their identity versus looking at the data. And so it brings up, that data versus narrative piece. And as a father to two Black boys, how have you seen yourself, or how have you navigated these conversations with your own children? Because we know that degrees won't protect you from this. Your housing situation won't protect you from this. Getting them in the best schools won't protect you from this. I'll share a story about something that happened with my son when he was going to interview at high schools, and we were looking at some of the best high schools within our city, and he experienced a racist he had a racist experience. So how have you found yourself navigating this conversation with your own children?
Well, my sons are currently 9 and 11. So I just had one to enter middle school. This was this week. Yesterday actually was his first day of school, and the other one's in 4th grade. And so my children are actually Black and Iranian. My wife is from Iran, of course, me as a Black man. But one of the things that we understand as parents that our children's experience is going to be that of Black men. And so it's important that we prepare them to navigate a society that's going to view them as such, so that they are able to, to navigate it successfully, and to understand how racism is going to play out in terms of how they navigate school, how they navigate neighborhoods, the street, everywhere they go. Right, they're going to have this awareness. And so basically the education of my son started, just from the beginning, right? Even before any explicit conversations. It started with, just the books that they were exposed to, right? So as little guys, I remember, I would read, there's a book, Just the Two of Us. I think it's Will Smith. And so, having these images of Black fathers with their sons, so he can see those illustrations as I'm reading to him, and reading with the rhythm, and kind of singing, with the tune of, Just the Two of Us, and singing, so he can be exposed to that. Literature like there's another book I used to read to him, Jazz Baby, right? Same thing with these images in there. Because it's important to me, because there's research that supports that as early as age 3, their children are kind of developing these ideas about cultures, ideas about race. And so again, if we're not proactive, particularly when we talk about Black boys and Black people, period, our identities are under assault and attack daily. And so if we don't instill within our kids a healthy sense of self and a healthy sense of cultural identity, we know that there's a society, there's information out here that's going to that can strip them of that and give them an alien identity, which they can begin to act. And so with my own kids, it was important for us to surround them with these images, and also to protect them from others, right? So I remember the movie Rio that came out, right, about the birds in Brazil. And remember we were sitting there watching that movie. It was with my oldest son. And, I was always, the things that we were watching, I was always, watching what we were watching, right? So I never passively exposed them to any type of movie or anything without really scrutinizing and seeing what images or what messages are being transmitted through these films. But anyway, I noticed that in that movie, the guy that was stealing the birds, first of all, his skin, right, was darker. Yeah, absolutely. And then every time they showed him or he was about to do something, they were playing like, hip hop stop music, right? So his criminality, right, being a bird thief, was situated within a paradigm of Blackness. And so, just even watching that, and I couldn't really explain it to him at the time, but I knew I needed to turn that movie off and and show him some different types of things. And so I say all that to say that even before we engage in any type of explicit conversations per se with our children, as early as 1 and 2 years old. We need to be exposing them to images to help to give them a positive sense of their own cultural identity. And so that's what we did from the beginning. And so, of course, as time went on, and they got older, we began to expose them just to some more explicit conversations. Some of the things they would bring home from school. I remember my oldest brought home it was during Thanksgiving time, and so he brought home the whole Pilgrim Indian coloring sheet. And so that provided us an opportunity there to talk about our indigenous brothers and sisters, and talk about colonialism, and go into the whole age of exploration and how this land was taken, and so we were able to paint that picture for him, so he wouldn't be walking around with this this false idea of how all of that panned out. The friendship between the native people and the white colonizers. And so so I guess the lesson in that is to ensure that those things that our children are learning at school, that we're on top of that, right? Because we know that curriculum is another tool for social reproduction, right? That perpetuates these ideas that our children hold. And it's important that we scrutinize that curriculum because a lot of times it's not culturally responsive, right? And so as a result, we're going to make sure we protect our kids so that they'll have they won't be infected with these lies. There's one other point that I want to make too, particularly because this thing goes in cycles, right? As in age, because some people believe the children may be I shouldn't talk to them while they're too young, and all these types of things. It's important that we understand that at certain intervals there are certain things that are appropriate and that we should be doing in ways that in which our students or our kids can receive them. And so just recently, for example, I started just buying these books for my son, because I remember even the way my dad raised me. When I got to middle school, I'm reading Miseducation of the Negro in 7th grade.
Wow.
You know what I mean? He wants to make sure, I was reading it, not really understanding, but I got the gist of it just enough. And so now that my son is entering middle school, and we look at this middle school as this identity forming age. And so I have him looking at and reading some other literature. He most recently read a book, Ghost Boys. And Ghost Boys is, kind of deals with police brutality and young black men being confronted with that and the realities of that. So, so these are some of the ways that we've been dealing with our own sons as it relates to helping them to understand race.
What you said is so true. And I'm thinking about my own son too, who will be starting high school, and just how we've had to navigate certain conversations around images that he saw that was projected back to him. There's a story that I tell when he was in getting ready to go to middle school. We were interviewing for an after school program, and he told the woman that he wanted to be the first person in his family to go to college. And my head almost rolled on the floor. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like you have two college educated parents. And when we were talking about it afterwards, I had to do some digging to get because he didn't think he said anything incorrect. And then he brought up, well, the players that he likes on TV, that's their story. Like that's what he thought the story was for Black boys. And you bring up that identity piece. And when I'm working with parents, one of the things that I often say to them is around middle school, parents fall to number 4 as far as creating that identity. We're often replaced with media or culture, school, peers, and then, and then it's us. And so everything that we had invested was really being tested. And when you think about any ism, whether it's racism or sexism, you are working against a system that is always on. And I think sometimes as parents, we're not even aware that we need to have certain conversations, right? Like the police conversations are in our face. I know I need to talk to him about having this conversation. I didn't know I needed to talk to him about why he wants to go to college. That was a conversation that being that you were at 2 out of my 3.
Right. Yeah, you was like that's one we don't have to have.
Right.
We're okay with that.
I didn't think that we needed to have, but yet that data versus narrative piece, where the data, and this is something for those of you tuning in, I talk about this often, the data shows one thing, but that narrative that is created is so strong that it'll trump the data, because his data is that he has two parents who graduated from college, but the narrative that he's been given as it relates to why Black youth want to go to college is because I want to be the first one. And so that became his story. And so to see it actually play out in our own household was like, oh my gosh, like this is bigger than I even imagined, because I wasn't even able to protect him from that, myself. And when you look at the images, another movie that stands out to me, two other movies that stand out to me for parents of younger children, is the movie Sing, where Outler plays the gorilla, the father, or who's in jail, right? So Black gorilla, he's in jail. His son wants to make it, and then the brown bears, the brown colored bears, are these gangsters too, and so
right.
The color association, because younger children associate things by color, right? They're very aware and descriptive of that, and just the need for parents to be very, very proactive in, like you said, policing almost what or filtering rather what images are being shown to their children as far as representation that are seeping into their minds and giving them a narrative about who they are that goes against everything that you're trying to do. And
Absolutely.
So with that, as parents begin to navigate this conversation, and especially parents of color, because I've had so many parents of color come up to me in workshops or, even via social media, talking about the anxiety that having conversations about race brings up for them, right? So, as a parent, as a mom, my son, like I said, my son is going into high school. I have my own anxiety that I have to control before I have conversations with him. And so how do you, or what advice do you have for parents who are getting ready to have these conversations so that they're able to have it in a way that brings clarity and understanding and doesn't promote or provoke anxiety or nervousness for their children, but also educates them to the way that society works, the way that society may view them or see them?
Yeah, that's particularly when we talk about because a lot of our conversation so far has been about talking to Black children about race, and I mention that because these conversations need to happen with Black and white youth, Latino youth, everybody, right? But this conversation as relates to anxiety is going to particularly as it relates to having it with Black youth, is going to take on a particular right, because we are in a society where we're getting killed, right? This implicit bias that's causing these knee-jerk reactions of law enforcement officials. It's important. We have to kind of teach our kids or educate them about the realities that they're going to face in a society that where by virtue of them showing up, there's going to be certain reactions and knee-jerk responses to just their very existence in certain spaces, and so that can bring up some sense of anxiety within them. And I don't know if that's able, if we're able to it may be just a natural byproduct of some of these conversations. I don't think that of course that we should teach them to be fearful. We should arm them because in essence, we're really preparing them for war, right? When we think about it, right? You're at war with an ideology or ideas and people's perceptions of you. And so, but I think armed with this healthy sense of self, they will be able to withstand some of the microaggressions that they're going to experience. They'll be able to withstand those things. So for example, I'll give you an example just from my own life. When I did a presentation down at Georgia State, right? So I was in my bachelor's program, and I presented a paper, and ironically, it was a paper on pedagogy of the oppressed, right? Talking about in terms of oppression and racism and the need for education to be a means for ousting the oppressor within and liberating our minds from racial ideology. And immediately after that presentation, one of my classmates, middle-aged white woman. We went in the hallway and she was like, you did a great job of your presentation and you were surprisingly articulate. And so, right. And so, right. And in that moment, I'm like, okay. So I asked her, well, why were you surprised?
Mm-hmm.
You see? And so, and at that moment, I think she kind of, reflected on what she had said and, kind of was aware of what, the racism within that particular comment. But that could have, preparing our students or preparing our children for situations like those, right? So from the microaggressions to preparation for, the actual aggressions where we look at things like, encountering police officers, things that sort. I think they could be armed with that information, and knowing once they encounter certain situations, how to react consciously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And make conscious and intentional decisions as it relates to how should I comport myself? What do I need to do in this particular situation? And during the conversation, they may have some anxiety, but I think ultimately, we just need to arm them so they know, look, this is what you are going to encounter or perhaps encounter in your life, by virtue of your skin being black. And here is, I want to help you to be ready, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing like not being ready and the anxiety that comes with that when you're confronted with certain things. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the extent to which we could prepare them, just engaging in real talk about what they're going to experience is important. Which that conversation is going to be different for a white parent talking to their students or their child about race, right?
And I want to go into that, like how. So we know that we are a society with um, a melting pot of races and cultures and ethnicities, and so we know that this conversation isn't just limited to Black parents having these conversations with their children. But what advice or suggestions, or where do all parents start with having this conversation? When I'm doing these trainings, it's not just Black parents attending them. White parents want to know, well, how do I teach my child not to say something that's offensive, or how do I break down the news to my child to let them know that what you may be saying may not be an accurate representation of this particular group of people. So how do parents find the words to navigate a conversation that is often not had, or had again after something has happened?
Right. So this is information that individuals are going to have to seek out on their own. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no public school that I'm aware of where there's any type of thorough explanation of the history of racism in the United States of America and how it influences our ideology, how it influences our systems and policies. There's been no education on that, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's going to become necessary for parents to educate themselves on
Mm-hmm.
these things, right? And so they're going to have to read, right? They're going to have to study. They're going to have to, engage in dialogue, cross-cultural dialogue, with people, who can explain and kind of, help them to sort out, these things that are playing out in their heads. And so that goes for Black folks and white folks, right? So they got to do the homework. And then, it's a matter of understanding, okay, so now that I understand all of this, how does this impact me as an individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? How does it impact the way that I think about things? So, for example, I get, again, using myself as an example, you know, uh, the biases that I have. I got on an airplane, soon after, well, not too long after 9/11, and some of my Arab brothers and sisters got on this plane, and feeling myself being, this
Mm-hmm.
fear, emerging within me, from seeing them on that airplane, and me having to go back into my brain and think about, the biases that I have and
Mm-hmm.
how was that influenced by, the media and these images that I have been
Right.
fed as relates to my Arab brothers and sisters. Same thing happened with a woman. I walked on an airplane. There was a female pilot. She had to be about a little bit over 4 feet tall, and that kind of thing. So having that awareness to go back and think about what I'm thinking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these are things that white people have to begin to develop, these habits of mind where they are able to analyze the beliefs and assumptions that they have about other people and be real about that, right? A lot of times there's this fear of not confronting that, because then I'm going to have to admit that I have these racial thoughts, right? And everybody, wants to believe that they're colorblind, that they don't see this stuff, and then, which then turns into, well, I'm gonna teach my children to be colorblind, which then means I don't talk about race with them at all either. I just teach my kids to accept all people. And so we know with that type of approach, we're subjecting them to the sidewalk, the moving sidewalk. They're just going to stand on it. They're going to be, they're going to accept whatever the default meanings or definitions of that are prevalent in our society today. So again, doing that homework is going to be important, and also challenging the ideas that are in their own heads. And then they're going to have some real conversation with their children about what is happening, how whiteness has been situated in our society, the sense of superiority, white privilege. All these conversations have to be had, and these kids are going to have to be aware of how that operates, and how those thoughts impact their ability to connect with others, their ability to be fully human themselves.
I want to go to a comment that Kathy made, and she says that, is there a way to educate them and keep them aware of ongoing racial tensions among them without robbing them of the innocence, carefree, stress experience that is supposed to be childhood as we understand it? So I have my own thoughts on that. Kathy, thank you for asking that. What do you, is there a way to balance that, to have these transparent conversations, but I still want you to be innocent because that's what you deserve?
Absolutely. It's very important, right? And so, there's some research out there that talks about how, for example, when white children are in public, right, they're able to go and, they may be running all around, exploring and being a kid, being able to kind of explore the world around them and learn from their experiences in their surroundings. Whereas Black parents, due to, people talk about this whole idea of a stereotype threat, right? I don't want my children to be perceived as wild and obnoxious. And so, because, I don't want, because the idea is Black people don't know how to rear and raise their children, for example. And so we tend to kind of constrict them, right? And don't allow them to do these things. So I think it's important that we do allow our children, right, to explore, right, to be children. But again, at the same time, these conversations have to be developmentally appropriate, right? So the way that we introduce them to these topics have to be, we have to be skillful so that we don't rob them of that freedom. We don't rob them of, the ability to, just kind of create and kind of develop their own ways of experiencing the world.
It's helpful. What has been helpful for me is that I've made everything almost a teachable moment. Everything becomes a conversation piece. So much so, my son has a very dry and witty sense of humor. So much so now when I'm telling him you need to do this, his first response, are you telling me this because I'm Black? I'm like, Donald, stop. Like, it's like I was telling you because I'm your mother. But it's become like race has become a conversation piece that we don't avoid. And so, even as he listens to music, we're breaking down the differences in the music that is played on certain stations versus the music that is played on quote unquote mainstream or pop stations, and the messaging and the relationships, relationships or not that he's hearing. And then what then does that do? And for us, what has also been helpful too, and let me know if you found this helpful as well, is creating an environment where there is representation of other Black and brown children having fun and living their lives, and he gets to see in real life um, the opposite of the narratives that society wants to throw at him about who he is and who we are as a people, and even, you know, also when we think about racism too, and even who, you know, white people are as a people too. Like, I need him to know that there are good people across, you know, across
Absolutely.
all races, and part of
Absolutely.
your work is to create relationships with them too.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know, and you saying that makes me, you know, just think about uh, you know, these teachable moments that you mentioned, you know, where, you know, just in real time, right? As we're navigating, going here and there,
Mhm.
makes me think about one time I began to notice, and my wife and I began to notice that my oldest would, you know, let's say we were walking downtown Atlanta and we passed by, you know, a group of black men, you know, they may be, you know, homeless, whatnot. I was just noticing like this shift in my son's demeanor, right? And so again, you know, like you say, in real time, always being, you know,
Mhm.
aware and being able to have conversations with them within those moments, and then also our own demonstration of our reactions in situations like that, right? And so when he sees me engaging with the brothers and sisters, you know, I have to be able to show him, you know,
Mhm.
as opposed to crossing the street or, you know, oh, look at him and that kind of thing. So in my own actions, demonstrating to him that there's no need to fear, you
Mhm.
know, anybody that may appear, you know, you know. So then dealing with, you know, where is he getting these ideas from, right? So all these things are important that, you know, we have to always be on point. We can never let our guards down
Mhm.
because again, these images, these messages are so pervasive that we can't afford to do that. Right?
Mhm.
It's a matter of preserving our own, uh, uh, you know, humanity
Yeah.
and preserving the humanity of our children. That
Mhm.
we can't afford to let our guards down. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Because Kathy's comment reminds me of an article I just read that came out that talks about the impact of racism on the mental and physical health of Black children. And, you know, we're starting to see, or starting to actually measure it earlier. And that need, you know, to understand that you have to always be aware, but then also, so how we deal with equity from a trauma informed lens, recognizing that discrimination is a form of trauma, that people have these experiences. You know, to me, the term microaggression is interesting because a lot of times there's nothing micro about them, about them, you know, and so um, when I'm dealing with it from a trauma informed or trauma focused or responsive lens, to me, my first thought is to always, how do we create safe spaces for our children, right? Because for a child to be, I mean, we know as an adult the toll that it takes on us. You know, the stress that it takes on us having to navigate or code switch or do this or whatever. But for a child who may not have the awareness or the skills, as they navigate this world, how important is it for parents to create those safe spaces for their children, and how do they go about doing that?
I think it's essential that those spaces are created, and spaces where diverse youth are able to get together to learn, right? The very
Mhm.
things we're talking about now, to learn about race and how it operates in our society.
Mhm.
And so personally, you know, my children, we're blessed to be a part of the worldwide Baha'i community.
Mhm.
And within the Baha'i community, and for those who aren't aware, the Baha'i community is a worldwide spiritual community that's built upon the spiritual truths that of oneness, the oneness of humankind, the oneness of God, and the oneness of religion. And so, and we're charged with carrying forward an ever advancing civilization where we not only are concerned with the material advancement of the world, but also the social and spiritual advancement. And part of that is teaching our children or raising children, a group of children to be the, you know, a prejudice-free generation, right? To be able to read reality, to be able to question it, and to be able to operate within it to create new ways of relating with others under the, you know, within the paradigm of oneness and justice.
Mm-hmm.
And so our children are part of children's classes, right? And in these children's classes, they're learning, just the spiritual truths of oneness, right? So they're studying quotations that talk about, so powerful it's the light of unity that it can illuminate the entire earth. They're doing projects where, they're engaging with other youth to do service projects in the community. My oldest son is part of the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program, which is another opportunity for him to engage with diverse groups of youth, to have certain conversations about social reality, and engage in projects designed to better the community. And so those spaces have been ideal in helping my children to have these conversations and interact with diverse groups of people. And so that's essential, I think, in terms of because most of our living, particularly here in Atlanta, we live in segregated communities, right? And we think about those living patterns are preventing our children from attending school in diverse schools. There, so basically the messages that children are getting about the other races or things that they're getting from media. This is not through any type of relationship or bonds or friendship that allow them to develop their own perceptions and develop their own relationships. So it's important that we are consciously aware of what we're doing in terms of creating spaces where our children are able to experience diverse people. Another thing too that we do intentionally, my oldest son, he plays basketball. And so there's two different leagues that we sign him up for during the basketball season. One league is closer to where we live, right? We live, it's a diverse community, but this particular league is pretty much predominantly white. And so he plays in that league, but we intentionally sign him up in another league that's predominantly black. It's, it requires us to drive just a little bit further down the road, but we want him to be exposed to diverse people. We want him to have those experiences so that he, is not in this space where, he is ill-equipped to understand the realities of different communities and be able to interact with different people. And so to your point, it's very important that, parents create spaces where children can interact with diverse people and have conversations, real conversations about race, explore, explore racism and explore ways for them to create differently, because these children, we allow them to, or we create the space and opportunity, they will be able to create the society that we know that we need to have. And so it's important that they are allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read you a question by Sharice, and we're going to close out there. This is a long question. So it says, has the mentality changed? I'm going to put it back up. Much since slavery in regards to raising children in this Western society? It seems as though Black parents have to condition their children to be constantly aware and prepared by using fear. We say we are preparing them, but is it really just instilling fear? Fear of what is perceived about them and fear of what could happen to them. Are we instilling fear when we are educating them? What do you think about that?
That's a powerful question, because I can't say that we aren't doing that, right? We think about slavery. We talk about the fact that many of our ancestors, enslaved Africans, had to miseducate their own children as a means of their children's own survival. Right? They had to instill a fear within them, because certain things that their children did could cost them their lives. And so we talk about that back in 1619, 17, 1800s. Then we fast forward to 2019, and we are having these similar conversations about police, right? And preparing our children to navigate, the streets. And so, that's a very interesting question. And so, because in large part, I think fear is part of that. And so how do we work around that to give them a sense of being able to navigate society without this fear, right? How do we replace that? And so that's a great question.
And how do you break that down? So my training again is in mental health and clinical psychology, and so I'm trained to understand that there are two emotions that we have, and one is love and one is fear. Every other emotion that we experience can literally be traced back to one of those two emotions. And so I know just in my work with parents, um, I always ask and asking myself too, where is this parenting practice coming out of? Where is it? What is it rooted in? Is it rooted out of love? Because I parent very differently. I'm parenting in the present moment versus when I parent out of fear. I'm parenting out of anxiety or what possibly could happen. And so fear for a lot of us turns into control. And we know that children are naturally programmed to be curious and to explore. But when I'm parenting you out of control, I'm doing two things. I'm stopping you from that exploration. But then also, a lot of times, what I'm doing is I'm stopping you from coming to me because children are the experts of us too, just like we are the experts of our own children. And so I'm stopping you from coming to me because I'm teaching you that this is something that I'm scared of. And so for children, if mommy or daddy is scared, then I can't touch it, right? I have to figure out how to navigate this on my own. And so sometimes when we think that we're creating platforms or pathways to conversation, when we use fear to guide that conversation or guide that behavior, we're actually doing the opposite. I'm actually stopping that communication, versus sometimes acknowledging I'm scared, saying that to our children, I'm scared versus having that controlled behavior that shows that I'm scared, but I'm not going to say it because I'm literally controlling and stifling your potential for growth or stopping that need for exploration from happening. And, I'm going to pull up Kathy's comment again, too. That's what she's afraid of, having them miss out on their childhood innocence because they have that fear that we've embedded in them. And so they develop that stereotype that are people looking at me, or people wondering this about me, or am I not as pretty, thinking about the doll test, am I not as beautiful, or that representation that I'm not seeing it, how am I internalizing that too? And so one of the things that I'll often tell parents is do a quick assessment on that. Like, where's this statement? Where's this behavior coming from? What emotion is driving that? And if it's a fear-based emotion, one, we have to own it, but then two, how then does that lead to a conversation with my child where I can give them the opportunity to see what their emotion is too, so that my fear doesn't turn into control and overpower or dominate what's going on.
Yeah, something that came to mind as you were talking is I think about fear is a reaction, right? Fear is like a reaction to some type to a stimulus. And I'm thinking about how do we flip this conversation on its head, where when we're talking to our students or our children about race, how do we flip this thing to where it becomes where we're placing them in a position of empowerment, right? Or an empowered space where they're able to see themselves as change agents within this whole paradigm, right? And so it's like, okay, as I'm learning about race, I'm not learning it, I'm learning about all the realities and all the things that can happen to me, but I'm also in the process, more emphasis is being placed on my ability to create and build a new society, right? And so if we place the emphasis there, right, and give them the tools that they need to be change agents, to be actively anti-racist, to be individuals who work towards challenging any type of racial, sexual, any type of injustice. How do we place them in that position of power and reframe the conversation to where it's not things that I should avoid or things I should be watchful of, but things that I can actually act upon in the world around me to make it a better place. And, and helping them to understand, whenever you stand for truth or you're standing up against injustice, there are some things, that, people are going to challenge you, right? Your ideas. And, you can even, give a historical context. There are some people who've lost their lives as a result of it. But I think, we need to explore this whole piece of children being educated about all of the isms from a space of, I can actually change this, right? And so empowering them to not just be reactive or responsive to these things, but to actually be agents for change.
Right. And And shifting too from, so I'm going to go trauma informed. There's something called the trauma triangle where you have a victim, perpetrator, and abandoning authority at each of those 3 points. And so shifting our mindset to victim to survivor, like we have survived this. Like what strengths can we build
Absolutely.
that showcase us as survivors? And that's what's embedded when you think about some of the atrocities that have happened to certain groups of people who have been persecuted. How they're taught is through that lens of survival. You are that strong, right? And so why are we not, or what do we need to do to do the same thing for our children? When blackness is introduced, how is it introduced in a way that makes people feel proud and happy and celebrates the strength that had to occur in order for us to be here now? And that's what I thought about when you talked about flipping that narrative on its head, where it changes from one of fear and control to one of strength and celebration. And then how do I instill this in you and create your identity outside of that? Within that framework.
Absolutely.
We are
Absolutely.
almost at time. 45 minutes goes by fast when you're talking
Yeah,
about.
it does.
So, Dr. Outler or Dr. Anthony, when you think about this topic, talking to your children about race, what are some takeaway points? If you had 3 takeaways for parents as they navigate this conversation, this necessary conversation, what would it be?
All right, I actually wrote these down, Dr. Tara, so I wouldn't forget. We want to punctuate some of these things that we've talked
Okay.
about. And so first, as we talk about parents, first arming themselves with the information, right? We talked about that, right? Having an awareness of the history of racism and racial oppression in this country, and how those ideas, the residue of those ideas, influence us and influence the systems and influence the outcomes as relates to, employment, housing, all of the disparities that we experience in our society. And I think this is particularly important for all children to learn, because Black children, when they begin to look at disparities or the conditions in which our communities are in, they could very easily locate the problem within themselves, or say there must be something about being Black that causes people like me to live in situations like these. And so it's important that parents are aware of that history and are able to explain that to the children, so they understand how did our society get to be this way. And so that's number one. Another thing is, as we talked about a little bit earlier, is finding ways of finding opportunities for these cross-cultural bonds and friendships to be nurtured between diverse groups of people, right? And I don't want to be mistaken to say, you just put these children together, and then we're going to have this whole, everybody's singing, kumbaya, and we're all one happy family. But what I'm talking about is when these children come together, these Black students have already been, Black children have been armed with this sense of self, so that when they enter into these diverse spaces, they don't feel like they need to assimilate. They come in with a healthy sense of self, and they're able to exchange, with the people in these diverse groups in ways that are more authentic and more, where I equate it to like a symphony orchestra, right? The clarinet's not going in trying to sound like a trumpet, right? Everybody's coming in as themselves and creating and having a harmonized dialogue within these spaces. And at the end of the day, guys, I think what it boils down to is levels of commitment and levels of consciousness. And what I mean by that is this, are we committed? Or actually, first of all, do we even know or feel like or see the fact that racism is infecting our society, and we need to do something about it, right? And so for white parents and Black parents, understanding that racism, we have a problem, and we are all infected by it, and we all need, have to do something to change it. And then how committed are we to arming our children with the tools necessary to create a better society and a better world. And so, I think that those things are important, right? So knowledge, parents having knowledge themselves. Number two, finding ways to have or put their children in situations where they are able to develop cross-cultural relationships. And then three, having a commitment and instilling their children a commitment to be champions for social justice. Those things are key. We are to really arm our children to create a better world.
Thank you. I love every one of the points, and I love that analogy about the orchestra. I can show up my authentic self and not have to blend in and still make this beautiful sound and come together. It makes me think about two things, and Kathy's comment too before we end. One, when we talk about healing, which is the premise of the Dr. Tara Tuesdays, let's heal together. There have been so many books written about all of these topics. And so if it could have been, we would have done it. We would have read the books, we would have read the articles. And to me, the key is we have to relationship our way to healing, right? It comes from relationships with ourselves, relationships with other people. And Kathy, your comment made me think about an article by James Baldwin called The Uses of the Blues. And he says that, in every generation, ever since Negroes have been here, every Negro parent has had to look at that child and find a way to make that child who will be despised, not despise themselves. And, creating that love and, like you said, that sense of self within our children in a way that it becomes unshakable, that I'm able to stand in any position as young as 3, as young as 5, as young as 15, and still hold my authenticity with a sense of pride versus a sense of shame. And I think ways that just the knowledge that you dropped definitely helped me. And I believe help other parents and our listeners, those who are on and those who will watch later, watch the replay, arm themselves and start to think, well, what is it that I know? How can I, like you said, how can I further educate myself? I'm going to put the name of the book that you mentioned earlier, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, in our comments list. If you have any other resources, please feel free to drop them in the comments list too, for a place for parents to start. And I'll put a couple other resources too as good starting points for parents of all races to begin this important and necessary and really ongoing conversation. Dr. Anthony, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Absolutely.
And I have appreciated so much the gems and the wisdom and just your authenticity. Thank you for showing up as a father, as a husband, as an educator, and as an expert on this topic as well. For everyone who's tuning in, thank you so much. Next week, we're doing, this month, we're doing a whole back to school series for parents. We're actually going to be talking to another expert next week, Dr. Lauren Bynum, on supporting parents and children, or support for parents whose children are under the LGBTQ plus umbrella, and bringing that conversation into our community as well. So Dr. Anthony, again, thank you very much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Everyone knows my tagline is Let's Heal Together. I'll see you all next Tuesday. Peace.
All right. Take care.